All right, had a fun chat here with Mr. Ryan McBeth. At about the 43-minute mark, he got a notification that his laptop battery was dying. We went for it, rolled the dice, but it didn't work out. So there's a bit of an abrupt ending here, but overall, I really enjoyed the conversation. Hope you do too. Ryan, what's going on, man?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, man, thanks for taking the time. So for anybody who doesn't know, I imagine most people watching this on YouTube know who you are and follow your channel or aware of it at the very least. It'll be down in the description below. For anybody who doesn't, Ryan McBeth, educational videos around, I want to make sure I say that first, because it's educational videos around programming, which is way over my head. A lot of open source intelligence, and then the war in Ukraine. And I say educational because I think OSINT doesn't label it correctly. You're deeper than that. You provide a little more to it than just the raw data. A lot more than that.
You can say I try to provide context for military operations, but not just with Ukraine, with other operations in Russia, China, Iran. I just recently did Sudan. I would like to get into Ethiopia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, but a lot of that's just time.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I personally have spent so much time getting further and further down in the weeds, and it's a rabbit hole. You start down one path and it never ends with any one of those conflicts. You could spend your full time doing it. And as soon as I pull out a little bit to start looking at like what's going on with North Korea, like you lose sight of something else and you can't get far enough. It's tough.
Yeah, I wish I had like a producer, like just someone who could say like, well, this is popular right now, go do that. But like, I still have a full-time job. I still exercise, believe it or not. I actually do exercise. And I do YouTube and I sleep. Like those are the four things that I do. I've had people ask me, "Oh, do you want to join my Aliens Fire Team Elite group?"
What is? I don't understand what that could be. What is an Alien 5 Elite group?
So Aliens Fire Team Elite is I guess it's a third-person shooter where you're part of like a fire team from the Aliens movies, and.
Oh.
And I'm familiar with the game because like that's something I'd see online and go, wow, I really want to play that, but I'm never gonna have the time to do that. Video game. It's a video game. People want content. I got to give them what they want.
So you're still one man show through and through?
Yeah, I'm still a one man show. I have an agent. My agent might direct me toward things like I was supposed to go to the Philippines to witness an exercise between the U.S. Army, the Filipinos, and the Australians, where they were actually going to fire HIMARS and fire a Patriot, and it would be the first time a HIMARS was fired in the Philippines. And
no signaling to China there at all, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, it's an exercise, right? We have partner nations, and it's great to go to these partner nations and learn what the Filipinos do, so we can take that information back, and we can do things better. And the Filipinos can look at what we do, and they can take that information and take what works for them and integrate that. But then I got a chance to go to the international sniper competition, and it's like, my agent's going like, snipers, that's evergreen content. That's what he calls it, evergreen content. People watch your sniper video for the next 10 years. But if you do a video about shooting a HIMARS, what else you got?
I've got family in the Philippines. My uncle, my mom's brother, his spouse, and I think one of their kids live in the Philippines now. And I've never been.
Yeah.
Actually, one of them got married there. It is no joke getting there. That is not a drive to Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah, that was going to cost about $10,000 for me to fly there. And I'm never going to make that money. But then it cost $10,000 for me to go to Colorado over Easter weekend to do the BioFire. I did a video on this BioFire smart gun.
That's cool.
And then I turned right around. I flew. I'm an international jet-setting journalist. Then I fly right to Fort Benning Easter weekend to do a video for the sniper school. It was about $10,000 there. I'm so happy I have that Substack channel where people contribute directly because, kind of like you, videos go yellow all the time. And it's like, oh, all right, oh, lost that one.
So like that opens up this whole realm that I think is so cool. You've been on a handful of like real radio shows and TV shows. I saw you on Newsmax a couple of weeks ago. And I'm glad you did that because so first off, I was nervous for you when you did that, because who knows how it gets clipped and how it's portrayed and how you get pressured into saying something. But you did great. There was none of that. And it made me think after, who cares? Because first off, they don't have the audience that you have at baseline, which is crazy. To think about that, like a major news network versus a guy part-time YouTube. But if somebody sees you say something and it's clipped out of context there, you've got hundreds of hours of your opinion. That's going to outweigh any 10-second out of context clip. And I just hadn't really kind of processed all of that before.
Yeah, they're actually, I've been on Newsmax, I've been on Voice of America, been on a couple of other shows for different cable networks. I've been on the BBC, Polish television as well. And I think for the most part, what they want is they just want someone to roll in and explain why something is going on.
Sure.
There's really not a political, I know some channels might lean left or right, and they might have a political spin in other parts of their show. But facts are facts, and physics is physics, and the way military equipment works is the way military equipment works. There's no, and I've often said I want to be the Neil deGrasse Tyson of open source intelligence and military topics, where I'll go on your show and I'll explain. Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson might explain this is why the James Webb Telescope is so important. I want to say, well, this is why opening another howitzer ammunition plant is so important. There's no left or right to it. There's just fact and not fact.
You're in a good spot to do that too, because you have the military experience, but you're not currently, I believe, not any current active connection to the military. So that's a really good spot.
Not with this arm. I've had people, well, how come you're not in Ukraine fighting? Well, between the pills I take every day for high cholesterol, acid reflux, hair loss, and the fact that my arm was ripped off and reattached, there isn't an army in the world that would take me. And back when this thing kicked off, I remember thinking, if NATO gets involved and the U.S. has to send troops over there, I'm retired. I got the D-214. I'm retired, but I don't know if they can recall you after retirement, or they might ask for volunteers. I think I would go in the U.S. as a trainer. I'd be a pretty good trainer. I was an instructor. I was an infantry instructor for 3 years. I could do that again. Yeah, I'd probably lose some weight while doing it, But I frontline, like, my God, I can barely lift 40 pounds with this arm. Like this thing is hanging by a couple of bolts.
Yeah, I think people forget that training piece of these military. Like if God forbid the global war kicks off and a draft happens. Even in World War II, we had millions of people here in the U.S. facilitating troop movements and logistics and dealing with casualties and training. And my unit in the reserve right now is a training unit. That's the job. Yeah. It's technically could be deployed, but we had somebody ask, we had a general officer come down and do his normal just visits, talking to people. And somebody asked that question, what happens if this war escalates? Would we go? And he said, no, you'd be activated and go to XYZ base and you would be training soldiers 7 days a week. We look past that. Not everybody is going to be, slinging grenades into trenches. There's a lot that's needed to be done just to get people out the door.
No, I know during World War II, it was like a clown. It was like a clown show when we activated the National Guard, I think a year ahead of time, just to give them some ramp up time. And I know we had, I want to say it was in 1940, there was some exercise in Texas. And like back then, they really didn't have miles gear, so they used mathematical formulas like, well, it was a company against a platoon, so the company wins, but you sustain this many casualties. And that's when they're kind of learning, like, all right, how do we use tanks? How do we integrate horse cavalry? How do we do supplies? That kind of thing.
Horse cavalry.
And I know this one exercise, like 46 some people died during this one yearly exercise in Texas.
Actually died?
Today. Yeah, I think active duty National Guard, 46 people died. It's just stuff like they camped in a river in a dry riverbed and it rained and rollovers. And like, if that happened today, there'd be safety stand like there would be like, it would be crazy the amount of safety stand downs. But I guess back then it was like, all right, well, we lost 46 soldiers.
But at the same time, I wonder what our military would be like if it was in that situation again, where it's a global war and there's, if that was happening before the war, it's a little bit different. But if we're sustaining a certain level of casualties, I mean, it probably doesn't get the same level of attention,
Probably not. I know that a couple of months ago, there was a tabletop exercise where the United States essentially fought China over Taiwan, and we notionally lost 2 aircraft carriers. So that's 16,000 people, maybe 12,000 people gone. I'm sure some people survived notionally, but I don't know if America is really ready for that.
I agree.
I don't know if we can process that many casualties. But on the flip side, only 0.25% of anybody has ever been in the military. So I think it's pretty rare for anybody to actually know someone who's in the military.
Let alone somebody who's been killed in the military.
Let alone someone who's been killed. And that's kind of interesting too. It almost seems, and I hate to say warrior caste, but it almost seems like the U.S. has a warrior caste that's essentially made up of people whose parents served, and so they want to serve, and I would also say recent immigrants and people who are at the bottom rung of the social ladder who want to improve their life. That's essentially our warrior caste now. It seems like the average person doesn't look at the military as an option, which is kind of a shame because it can certainly improve your life. It can certainly give you a lot of skills, a lot of opportunities that the average person doesn't have.
I'm biased. It's been a very good experience for me, and I would recommend it to people. I always recommend it for people to look into, because there does come a time where something happens down the road. You get older, you have kids, you have a real job, whatever it is, and you can't do it. But at 18, 19 to 22, really, like, most people could do that adventurous type stuff. It's not great for everybody, but I think it does, to your point, has a lot of potential there. Something's up though. Like, there's been an issue, and it's not the recruiting numbers from last year are down or anything like that. I agree. It's not a viable option for a lot of people right now, and I'm not exactly sure why.
Well, I think, and I went over this in one video I did where I said beards, marijuana, and lifestyle nutrition. And, I don't partake in the devil's lettuce. I mean, I love these things, but a lot of people like to smoke marijuana now. It's legal in, I think, 18 different states. And, if you enjoy marijuana, that's not compatible with military service, that's a problem. And I was the kind of guy, as soon as, final formation, we're done for the day, run upstairs in my barracks room, crack open a beer from my mini fridge. That way, like, when my first sergeant or platoon sergeant comes upstairs, like, hey, we need a soldier to move vehicles, I can open the door with a beer in my hand. Oh, I'll do it. Oh, no, it's not your good, Sergeant McBeth. So, like, we all have our vices, right? But I think that if we federally legalize marijuana, we allow soldiers to smoke it off duty, just be fit for duty the next day, no different than alcohol. I don't see a reason for it. And the beard thing, there's no reason why a Sikh has to prove that he's a Sikh to join the military and get a special shaving waiver just so he can practice his religion. Just let soldiers have beards. If you enter a chemical environment, then it's commander's discretion. You got to shave. Or if, let's say you're a 72, oh my God, I forget the NBC MOS. You're a 72 series MOS. Then, all right, yeah, maybe you got to shave every day. But, there's no reason why African-American soldiers have to, I think it's every 2 weeks, you got to go get your shaving profile from the medic. Why? Why are we doing this to our soldiers? So I think those are two things right off the bat that can help with recruiting and retention. And,
Speaking of MOS, were you 11 Hotel?
I started out as 11 Hotel, and then the Army in the mid 90s or late 90s, they said, poof, they're all 11 Bravos. I'm
Yeah.
going to have to tell them. And then, of course, you roll into a light unit. They're like, you're 11 Hotel, you're carrying the Dragon. Like, okay.
So
And then when IBTCs became a thing, now you have a weapons company again. It's like, I ain't walking ever again. So from what I understand, the Army's actually changing again, and they're kind of bringing back the Bradley MOS, the 11 Mike MOS, but they're not calling it that.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so you should have him on your show, the Chieftain, Nicholas Moran.
Yeah. Great dude.
He had a great video about how the Army is going to take their Bradleys, and essentially you're going to have a Bradley lieutenant and a dismount lieutenant. And that kind of makes sense because the way it's supposed to work in Bradleys is the Bradley lieutenant's supposed to dismount. But you really got to do that, take off your CVC and put on your helmet and get out of the, and work at the dismounts. And then now the Bradley commander, the TC, isn't in his seat with theoretically the most important piece of gear, the ISR gear, the cameras, the thermals, and the radio.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about it, lieutenant's much more effective in that Bradley, being able to coordinate everything, than he is on the ground where he might not necessarily get all that ISR data.
Look, that's going to be something that comes out of this war. The cold side of this for the United States is we are learning there's going to be entire organizations stood up within the military, if they don't exist already, simply collecting and analyzing that type of, what kind of tactics and strategies on the battlefield are working, little things like that. Where does the commander need to be in relation to the armored vehicle when they have dismounts? We have nothing to compare this to.
No, and when you think about it, I think drone warfare, this is a tough one because we're always fighting the last war. And on one hand, you can say drone warfare is the future. But on the other hand, you can say that, well, if you're fighting a near-peer enemy and they have good EW, good electronic warfare, then maybe drones really aren't that useful. Because they might be able to jam those drones or shoot down those drones.
All those little civilian ones should not exist in a proper EW environment.
But they do.
Right.
But they do. And the Ukrainians and Russians, to some extent, are using them to great effect. So that's the question. Is that the future, or is that an evolutionary dead end? I did a video about the Bayraktar. Why haven't we seen the Bayraktar drone? It's because the Russians shot them all down and they figured out how to jam them. That's why. It was a great weapon at the beginning of the war when Russian EW really wasn't put together right. But it seems like whenever you have a job that professional Russian officers can do, they tend to do that job well. Whenever you have a job that NCOs do, the Ukrainians tend to do that well. And Russia they can't get that NCO thing right. They do have mid-level NCOs. The Starshina is, I guess it's kind of like their first sergeant. So I guess that would be my equivalent. I mean, I was a first sergeant, but I was an E7 first sergeant. They don't really have the platoon sergeant role. The lieutenant does the platoon sergeant role and the platoon leader role. So how do you do Kazovac? Who gets your beans and bullets?
It's an overwhelming being on the officer side. The idea of operating an organization without an NCO is overwhelming. Like it's not fathomable. It's to that degree.
But on the other hand, the Israelis operate like that too. They kind of have NCOs. They do in their Air Force. They have professional NCOs. But from what I understand with the Israeli Army, you're drafted in, and you do your 2 years if you're a male, 18 months if you're a female, and you kind of exit as their equivalent of a specialist. And then for the next 30 years until age 50, I believe, you're a specialist, and you might get called back. And if you want to be a leader, you become an officer. If you want to be a technical specialist, you become a warrant officer. If you want to stay on active duty.
Sure.
But it seems to work for the Israelis.
Are you saying that in the sense of like the majority of the force would be essentially RE4 and below, and then the lead? Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they do have NCOs on active duty, but from what I understand with their reserve units, and I've spoken. So I used to live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, And a lot of my friends were Israelis because they were the only ones who owned guns. So we would go out shooting, a lot, So I learned a lot about the Israeli military. But, in my defense, my knowledge of the Israeli military kind of stops, when did I move? I moved in 2017. I moved down to Washington, D.C. in 2017. So, maybe things are done a little bit differently now. But the Israeli military doesn't really have a professional NCO corps the way we do, but they seem to handle themselves perfectly well. But it could be because a lot of their E4s and below are empowered to make decisions, and that's what they're good at. Whereas the average Russian soldier, they're not necessarily empowered to make decisions, or they're afraid to make a decision without the officer saying it's okay.
I don't feel like we're getting a ton of that from the Russian side quite yet. I feel like that's going to be something we'll learn. There'll be memoirs written and things after the war from the Russian side, similar to World War II, where you start to get the diaries and the journals and the people actually telling their stories from the Soviet side. All the good stories are what you hear. All the bad stories get burned and thrown away or whatever it is. But I feel like the information war part of this is insane, because you can find Ukrainians online right now that are explaining the dynamics within their platoon day to day. Here's how we're operating in a way that's not giving away operational security, but just how the units are organized. You don't get that as much on the Russian side. It's very hard to find individual soldier accounts from the Russians thus far. At least that's what is that similar to what you've seen?
Occasionally it pops out, and usually I guess it's the more salacious stuff where you have a Russian soldier who's saying, like, we were sent to this place, we weren't given any food, we were put in this trench, I only fired 8 bullets out of my rifle, I don't know how to use this machine gun that they gave me.
Yeah.
And I've actually, more than once, I've had Russians reach out to me. I had no idea that there were some Russians who watch my channel, but I had, like, twice, actually, I had Russians reach out to me, and they asked me what the current status of the front was, because their buddy was in another town, and they wanted to know if that town had been overrun yet.
Wow. And that hits home, doesn't it?
Well,
in terms of being like very, very real time kind of stuff. Yeah.
It hits home because, number one, I'm thinking, why? They don't tell you this? Like, that's number one. Like, why are you reaching out to me with this asking me this information? Hey, I think I'm reliable. I'll tell them the truth. I am definitely on Ukraine's side, but I'm always honest when it comes to composition, disposition, status of forces. That's I am a truth seeker in that sense. And I know people in Ukraine don't like it when I say this, but I feel sorry for a lot of these Russian kids who they don't necessarily want to be there, and these kids are going to die. I mean, when the TOW missile was introduced in Ukraine, I was sick to my stomach, and I made a video showing the surrender hotline, because that ITAS system, I could see through smoke and fog, and they can't run from this thing, man. It's just going to find you, and it's going to shoot a missile, and it's going to kill you. And I would much rather you surrender to the Ukrainians than die. And,
I understand that sentiment. Like, if because I feel the same when these videos of people getting killed in drone strikes, like, it makes me sick to my stomach. Especially when there's somebody that's wounded and you see them, like, it sucks. That's a kid, or not a kid, but it's somebody with a family wanting to get back home to their kid, back home to their family. But I also recognize that I haven't had any of my family members killed in this invasion, haven't had my home, memories, town, whatever, destroyed by that entity. So we're not coming from the same place,
Yeah, you can feel sympathy, but at the same time, if you're in my way, and my way home is through you, and it's either me or you, more than likely it's going to be you. So I get it, but it's a very James Mattis view of things. I'm coming to you with tears in my eyes. Don't
So
make me destroy you, you know?
where do you think this ends? Just a gut feeling, no prediction, no timelines or anything like that, but 30 years down the road, when we're looking back on this, how do you think this conflict wraps up?
That's a good question. I've said it a couple of times that I don't believe there's going to be a surrender ceremony on a battleship. Um, what I envision is Ukrainian counterattack. I envision Ukraine gaining more territory back. What happens next is best case, worst case, most likely case. Best case, Ukraine counterattacks and Russia just collapses. And they are able to split their the Donbass essentially in half, and they can essentially eliminate any vehicles going to Crimea, at least over a land route. And now they're negotiating with Russia for peace from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness. And they might be able to take back Crimea, but Crimea is the size of Massachusetts, and you're gonna have to do a water crossing, and like that's just a freaking that's a nightmare in itself. To have to do a water crossing like that into Crimea. Might be possible, especially if Russia collapses. If Russia doesn't collapse and Ukraine is able to take back some territory, I think it buys them another 6 to 9 months of NATO weapons, and then they got to do something again. Worst case scenario is they attack and they don't succeed in gaining significant ground. NATO is going to keep giving them weapons forever. And I think there's some Ukrainians who are going to fight with their teeth and their fingernails if they have to. And these are people who made Molotov cocktails out of beer bottles. Like, let's go.
They're ready to go. They're signed up.
They're ready to go. But I guess what I see eventually is, I don't want to say Ukrainian victory, because I think both sides are going to lose here. There's no winner in this war. There is a loser, and there's someone who loses less. And the question is, can Ukraine be that group that loses less and negotiates peace from a position of strength? Ukraine has to make Russia realize that this war is not worth it anymore. So essentially, that's it. And I guess what I envision is a peacekeeping force in the Donbass that's similar to KFOR.
Sure.
Maybe something like that in Crimea, where now you have these two states, like the Donbass, Luhansk, and Donetsk, essentially become a quasi-Ukrainian state again, like the Kurds have in Iraq, where we have a KFOR-like or MFO-like entity that does peacekeeping there for the next 30 years. That's kind of what I could envision, and maybe something similar in Crimea if Ukraine can take back parts of Crimea. I could see something like that. That's probably the most likely course of action. You know, in 30 years from now, we have American National Guard units doing a tour in the Donbass and Crimea, and they meet up with French units and Italian units and
Chinese units,
even units from the South Korea. There's a coalition there, and they have their C4 games, their Crimea Force games every year, where they have an Olympic competition, like I did in the Sinai Peninsula.
I think that's fair. I'm of a similar mindset where, to think of what would have to happen for a decisive victory for either side, we've now seen Russia. There's no 500,000 force sitting aside waiting to crush the Ukrainian. Like, we've seen what Russia can put into this. And I think over the next few months, we will see what Ukraine can put into this with their new NATO equipment and a lot of newly trained troops. If that doesn't achieve something significant, I don't know. You're just, in my mind, you have to almost make something up. Say like, well, what's going to be different a year from now? It's not, is either one of those going to be substantially stronger? I don't think so.
I don't see Russia necessarily getting substantially stronger. From what I understand, they are still they're still refurbishing tanks, but they're having trouble getting the T-72 tanks up to their current standard, mainly because a lot of their optics aren't available any longer. I believe the French supplied a lot of optics for the T-72, T-90, and that supply is cut off. And it takes a while to get a homegrown industry of optics. And you also have to make a choice. Like, do we put good ISR on these tanks, or do we invest in something else? Because it is a binary choice here, because effort that you spend toward this is effort that you could be spending towards something else.
Sure. And Russia's, in a sense, has one arm tied behind their back with the sanctions. They don't have unlimited access to the international market anymore. How much that impacts them, we'll see. And there's smarter people than I that tackle it, but they can't source that stuff from everywhere.
No, and it's actually one of the things we should probably take out of this is that we've really gone downhill when it comes to manufacturing American weapon systems. They've always assumed that, well, the next war is going to be a short war. It's going to be a coin conflict, a counterinsurgency conflict. And now that we're entering the LISCO world, we're entering the LISCO world with fewer howitzer ammunition factories than we had before. And from what I understand, there was one black powder factory in Louisiana. It's like the only black powder factory in America. I think it's owned by Estes, the company that fires model rockets.
Oh, really?
Black powder isn't very popular, but it's still used by some hunters and reenactors, model rockets. And it's also used in the primers for artillery shells for 155 howitzers. Apparently that's black powder. So by having this one factory shut down, we still could manufacture howitzer shells from, or at least the howitzer primers from stocks of black powder that we have, but there was no backup factory. But that's something we got to think about. We got to think about like chip fabrication. One thing that this administration was smart about was bringing back on shore chip fabrication, because computer chips are the steel of today.
Sure.
I guess, in World War II, how many steel factories do you have? How many ball bearing factories do you have? Well, nowadays, steel is still important, but how many chip factories do we have? I mean, heck, how many shipyards do we have? I'm right down the road from Norfolk, right down the road from Hampton Roads. And I honestly, again, that's Department of the Boat People thing. Like, well, so I start getting into Department of the Boat People. So I start getting into Navy stuff. Like, I kind of go off track because I can only know so much,
But it's a good point about the manufacturing, though. I think the right way I would frame it is a wake-up call. I don't know that we're necessarily going to take action because we have the fallback right now of, but if it was us, then we'd do it, right? Then people would be on board and we'd transition. The only reason we're not is because, there's a segment in DC and a segment of the US population that would say we don't need to be doing this for Ukraine. There's enough pushback, I think, to where that argument can be made. It would be different if it was our war kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see, it seems like, at least on some things, it seems like both political parties are at each other's throats trying to score points. And
every day.
I once, when I first came to DC, I'll have to tell the story. I went on a date with this woman, and she was she worked for I-360, which is like this Republican data analytics think tank thing that helps people get elected. And I asked her, like, oh, what are you working on? So that's one of the first things you ask me on a date in DC. Who do you work for? That's because you got to see where you are in the hierarchy, because people who work for NGOs are down here, contractors are here, you work on the Hill, you're here, you work for the White House, you're here. So you can
kind of date up. You want to date up.
I try to date up, but this one woman, she worked for I-360, and I'm a contractor, so I'm not that high up in the hierarchy, right? And I asked her, what are you working on right now? And she goes, we're trying to get James McGreevey, not James McGreevey, the current governor of New Jersey. I can't remember his darn name. Murphy, I think it's Jim Murphy. Trying to get Jim Murphy elected. I was like, isn't Jim Murphy a Democrat? And she told me that there was a company that was trying to get this photo film, like this reflective film, put on all of the road signs and license plates in New Jersey. It's like this reflective film. And what they wanted was for the Democrats in the New Jersey legislature to introduce a law to get this film. You must have a reflective film of this reflection index, and only their company provided it, right? And so I said, is it James Murphy a Democrat? She goes, what's the difference? That's
There.
when I
All
realized,
right. Right out in the
right
open,
wing,
huh?
left wing, same bird. Like it's about money. It was
You
about
were
getting a reflective film put on street signs and license plates.
we're out here talking about, can the U.S. manufacture enough ships and weapons for a global war to keep our country safe? And there's people spending all their time about reflective tape on street signs in New Jersey. Great. I'm going to sleep well.
Like it is kind of funny to think about that, but I think there are enough people, and actually one of I wouldn't call it a benefit, but one of the side benefits of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq is that we have a whole generation of politicians who entered Congress with military experience. And that wasn't the case for a number of years. You might have had some people from World War II and Vietnam, but that wasn't the case for a number of years. And now you have people serving in Congress who know what it's like to have substandard equipment, or know what it's like to be fighting a war where they don't know what their objective is. And they don't want to see that happen again.
Well, I can't imagine how some of these new, if I'm in their shoes at this point and they're passing these crazy budgets that are hard to imagine, you're saying, where is that? Like, it's hard to appreciate where that goes down here at the soldier level. Like, we're still without gear. We still don't have money to send somebody to a school down the street. So these budget, like, we got to do something about that. It's not that, what is, how many years in a row the Pentagon's failed their audit, right? Like, we got to do better with that. There's so much money. There's so many things we could do. And I think service members going to Congress actually is probably a good way they'll be able to kind of tap that nail a little bit, won't they?
I hope so. And I know that we've had some pretty interesting failures, but I think that one of the things that makes America unique is that when we have a success, it's usually a pretty darn good success. The FCS, Future Combat Systems, that was something that it never quite worked. There's supposed to be this whole family of vehicles that was modular, could do this and do that, and it didn't quite work. But what came out of Future Combat Systems was stuff like the Blue Force Tracker. All right. So, we spent a lot of money. We didn't get the Future Combat Systems, but we got the Blue Force Tracker out of that. So, all right, that's something that's pretty darn useful, and we're only going to build from that. I'm sure is there a new. I've been out for a little while. Is there a new version of the Blue Force Tracker, or is it the same old Linux-based slow?
You're talking to a reservist, man. We don't mess with that stuff. I got a BFT story for you though. When we were in Afghanistan, they had there's a destroy button on there, right?
Yeah, self-destruct.
Yeah, wipes it down. It doesn't blow up, but it wipes the stuff down, and that sends a signal, or so we were told, like to the Pentagon, to the Department of the Army, because it means that a box has been destroyed, usually with an IED or detonation, something like that. One of our soldiers was like trying to set icons sitting on guard one night and hit delete. And you have to hit that button like 6 times. It does not, like, you can't accidentally bump it and wipe the whole box. This dude just kept like, are you sure? Yeah. Are you confident? Yeah. You really want to wipe everything clean? Yeah. Next thing you know, we're getting a call like, how was one of your trucks blown up? We can see it. What happened? A Private Smith out there just hammering the buttons. But yeah, I'm sure there's something a little bit newer than the BFT at this point, because it was pretty clunky. That was 2010, 11.
Yeah, there were times you'd be sitting in your gun, or you'd be rolling down through Michigan, and you'd get a call, and it's, did you leave yet? Like, yeah, we're on the road. We're at mile marker 5. Oh, our BFT says you're still in the yard. They probably could have picked a faster computer. It would have been. Okay, one of the things that I have realized is that, procurement is an issue in the sense that it takes so long to get something from concept to actually field with the soldier, that by the time that thing hits the soldier, it could be out of date. And when I was down at sniper school, I spoke with the Army marksmanship programs. They have a team that goes and does 3-gun matches and the shooting competitions. Sure, yeah. And The reason the Army has this team is that civilian long-range shooting and civilian marksmanship competitions are 10 years ahead of where the Army is. So by sending soldiers to compete in those matches, they learn things on the civilian side that they can bring back into the Army and teach soldiers to make a more lethal warfighter. And that's not something I thought of. It takes so long to get something to the warfighter that by the time the warfighter usually gets it, it's out of date. Now, in a way, it kind of makes sense because you have to have your audits. You have to make sure that they're using a certain number of American-made parts and everything's sourced correctly, and you have a certain number of minority vendors. I get that. I understand it takes time to do that stuff. But I think we might need to rethink how we acquire equipment. And another thing I've said is I think the next war is going to be a DevOps war.
Cyber?
No, well, it's a component. So DevOps is a combination of the word development and operations. And essentially DevOps means deploying software. And DevOps is something I've done before. And DevOps might be clicking a button and sending an update of software to a computer, or it could be burning something on a CD and taking that CD out to every single Humvee with a hard drive and updating something that way. Mm-hmm. Well, right now, the way we do DevOps is very slow. And let's say you have a weapon system like the F-35, very expensive weapon system. Now, let's say there's a new threat that we're facing in a near-peer adversary. And that near-peer adversary is using a new type of weapon. So the Army decides, all right, we need to put an icon on the F-35 that indicates that kind of weapon. So now that information goes back to Lockheed Martin. They have to write the software, they have to test the software, they have to deploy the software. And they might have to deploy that software by burning it onto a CD, flying out to Guam, and physically loading it onto F-35s.
I gotcha.
How fast are they going to be able to do that in a combat environment?
So when you say the next war is DevOps, you're talking about it's a battle for who can disseminate that information faster.
Who can disseminate that information fast enough? Because then you can have some theater commander that says, I'm not sending those F-35s up if we don't have this, icon on the display. So now you've reduced your lethality, right? Because you don't want to waste this weapon system. This weapon system gets shot down. You're not getting another F-35. That's another thing we got to realize, that this isn't World War II. We're pumping out P-51s at the rate of 4 a day or something, right? Like, as much as I hate to quote Donald Rumsfeld, we're going to go to war with the Army we have, not the Army we want or we wish we had.
Look, it's a great quote. It's a really good quote.
He wasn't wrong. He could have said it better, Because God knows he was traveling in an armored limousine. But that is true, that we're not going to get a new tank. We're not going to get a new jet fighter. What we have is what we have. So our software has to be deployable and lethal. Yeah,
I like it. It's good. I had not something I've thought a lot about, but I think you're spot on. It's going to be really important.
I think that's going to be extremely important. And if you take a look at something the Ukrainians are doing, the Ukrainians created an Uber app for artillery. That's not something we'd ever use in the American Army. Essentially, when a Ukrainian unit wants artillery, they use this app and they say, I need artillery here. Who can take this mission? And then people will bid on that mission. We would never do that. You think the brigade commander is going to give up his control of his most casualty producing weapon to some corporal? That's never going to freaking happen.
That's a cool idea though. I like that. Yeah. There's kind of ways we tackle that, but it's way more complicated than an Uber for artillery,
Yeah. But the Ukrainians figured that out and they're doing DevOps really well. They even have an app where people behind enemy lines can take pictures of enemy equipment, geolocate it, send that up. And so now, they're getting real-time intelligence from people behind enemy lines who are acting as civilians because everybody has a cell phone.
Jesus.
So
it's a crazy amount of info we're getting out of this. But Ryan, we're doing this on a Saturday, man. I've really enjoyed this, but we'll let you get back to enjoying your weekend. Where can people find you? We'll throw all these links down in the description below.
Ryan McBeth Programming on YouTube. Just type in Ryan McBeth, and not that hard to find. like, I'm not the professional Frisbee player.
Is that it's one or the other?
It's one or the other. I'm not the professional Frisbee player. He's in much better shape than me.
I'll note that.
More handsome.
Okay, just in case people make that mistake, I'll make sure I have a notation for that down below. Not professional Frisbee player. All right, Ryan.
Thank you so much, man. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, appreciate you taking time. It's a lot of fun. And if there's ever anything I can do to help in any way, of course, reach out. And yeah, looking forward to staying in touch, man. So Ryan's battery was down to like 2% when we were wrapping up there. We lost him. But yeah, check the description below for all of Ryan's information. We'll see y'all next time.